Good afternoon. I'm here to discuss Sophocles' Antigone. So this is a play that we're going to be discussing, and I hope you have this Dover edition. That's what my essay outlines are based on, and today's lecture will be based on. What's really exciting to me is despite this play being a great tragedy, high tragedy, it inspired this great American hero. He's a hero to me. It's the famous transcendentalist writer and humanist Henry David Thoreau. Henry David Thoreau's civil disobedience actually it proved to be an inspiration for the late great Dr. Martin Luther King, American civil rights hero and icon. So isn't it amazing how one literary work can just bring about so many other inspired, works of writing and literature? So this, of course, is all about following one's conscience, which is what Antigone does here. She goes against the rules of government of the state. We're going to get all to Antigone, to Sophocles, the great Sophocles as well. But just if I could begin by saying, and as you know, I try to make these literary works relevant. As I mentioned, for example, in the Iliad, there were certain themes that were timeless. And so here, certainly this is highly relevant, to what's happening today, right? Henry David Thoreau's civil disobedience, for instance. Thoreau felt, and again, this is in the 1840s, around that time period. That was a time of transcendentalism in poetry, literature. And so, Thoreau felt that one has to place their individual conscience, their private conscience above public law. And he was an idealist. Again, this was a time of, this is a very shameful time in American history during the era of slavery. And so he felt that, of course, slavery should be abolished. Quite the idealist. He aided runaway slaves in the Underground Railroad movement, Henry David Thoreau. And so in years after, a century later, the anti-Nazi resistance movement used this this great work, effectively as a manual of arms during World War II. Another admirer of Thoreau's work was Mahatma Gandhi. He always had a copy of Civil Disobedience with him, whether he was imprisoned or he was free. And really, it's one of the world's great statements about social justice and how that should be based on individual conscience. So it's no wonder that Dr. King was inspired by this work. And in fact, Dr. King wrote Love, Law, and Civil Disobedience as an inspiration from Thoreau. Thoreau is mentioned in Dr. King's other works, wonderful works as well. So again, it's interesting that Thoreau was inspired by Sophocles' play. And so just a little bit about the great dramatist Sophocles. He was known to be very handsome in his appearance. He was a genius as a dramatist. He had a lot of musical skill, really with his charisma. Also, he just was a Renaissance man, I feel like. He was just so talented in so many respects. He wasn't just a highly revered playwright, Sophocles. He would also, for his plays, be the producer, be the director as well. Really, he was a genius. What's also interesting is he was the first to bring about costumes and props and painted scenery, to the Greek theater. So yes, the man, was really brilliant, extremely brilliant. There's about 116, I believe, plays of his that have been lost, unfortunately, that are now lost. But the plays of his that we do have still are compelling, are still quite riveting, as you'll see. It's been said that because he had all these high posts, for instance, I should back up a bit here. Sophocles, he was a chief treasurer for the member states of the Athenian Empire. At one time, he was a revered statesman as well. And so again, Renaissance man. He was one of Athens' 10 military generals who later commanded armies. So it's been said, there's a story that he won the election for this position to be one of the military generals because of the popularity of Antigone. Interesting story. So just as I spoke about Euripides before, we talked about Euripides' Medea. Euripides was a loner. He was an outsider. He was morose, gloomy. The man was never known to have smiled. No one ever saw him smile, in Euripides' lifetime. Sophocles is just the opposite, Mr. Popular. Did that have something to do with his plays constantly winning the City of Dionysia festival? Maybe, perhaps. But I mean, they're brilliant plays in themselves, actually. So, of course, credit should be given there. So, as we move on, and you'll see in the extra credit discussion question I have, it's highly relevant to today. I do bring up Henry David Thoreau for the Antigone extra credit discussion. So I can't wait to hear what your thoughts are there. What we see with these Greek plays is the Greeks, they really wanted strong effects. They wanted energetic sensations. And so in terms of subject matter for the plays, the Greek playwrights would have these unique characters, horrific misfortunes that these characters had to endure, and these sort of unnatural passions. So you see these elements in the last play we discussed, Medea, clearly, and of course in this play as well. So these sort of effects that they wanted to create, the Greek playwrights, they were sensation hunters, basically. And so the Romantic era writers like Lord Byron and others really liked that aspect and wanted to somehow replicate those, sensations in their literary works. So as we're discussing this play, I feel like it's a tragedy in several respects. When you think about it, what Antigone is arguing here, her viewpoint, she wants to follow divine laws. She feels like there's a corresponding religious sanction, in other words, to what she is espousing and what Creon is espousing. Antigone is reverent to the gods below, the gods of Hades, which indicate that any individual has to have a proper burial. And so, of course, that's what she wants for her brother Polynices. That there has to be equality for the dead, according to the gods of the underworld. What about King Creon? His viewpoint is understandable as well. He is supporting the gods who protect his city. For example, Athena. Athena's temple, he's wanting to protect his city here. And so what is basically occurring in the story is that the brothers of Antigone, which would be the nephews of King Creon, they end up battling one another because Polynices means, quote unquote, the much quarreler. Polynices is seen as a treasonous rebel, an adversary to the city of Thebes. What does Polynices do? He brings a foreign army to battle against Thebes. What about Eteocles? Eteocles is supposed to be, the patriotic one, and so he is defending the city of Thebes. So what do these two brothers do? They battle one another. They both end up dying. And so, of course, Antigone wants to have a proper burial for her brother, for Polynices, and so Creon's decree forbids, such a thing to occur for an enemy of the city. It's understandable. To be paid those dues, those proper dues. So I'm going to start now with a close reading of the text. And I assume you have my version here. So here, as we begin, Antigone is proposing this joint attempt for her and her sister Ismene to bury their brother's body. Ismene is quite prudent. She tells her sister that she has a quote-unquote rash heart. This is on page 2. She tells her sister, quote-unquote, you are mad. And again, I just want to back up a bit here. The Greeks believed that the souls of those who had deceased, if they were unburied, the souls would be condemned to endless wandering and suffering. So again, proper burial is viewed as a divine ordinance. It's required by the gods, of course, by the gods of the underworld. Just something to remember here. So now Ismene, look at what she says on page 3. She's timid. She's terrified by King Creon's decree. She says, quote unquote, to her sister, "We must remember we are women born, unapt to cope with men, and being ruled by mightier than ourselves, we have to hear these things and worse. For my part, I will ask pardon of those beneath, of what perforce I needs must do, but yield obedience to them that walk in power." She says, to exceed is madness and not wisdom. So Ismene, she lacks Antigone's moral sense of duty. I feel like she's on the same page morally with her sister, but what is Antigone's instinct? It's to obey. Whereas Antigone is just, she exercises her own free will. I mean, that is quite admirable. Well, look at what Antigone says on page 3. Death so met were honor. If, in other words, Antigone is condemned to die because of her action, it would be honorable for her. She says, let's see here, death so met were honor, and for that capital crime of piety, loving and loved, I will lie by his side, Polynices. Far longer is there need I satisfy those nether powers than powers on earth, for there forever must I lie. She says that this is, quote unquote, what is approved in heaven, what she is about to do. So anyhow, these characters are so different. You wonder how they could be sisters. Ismene says on the top of page 4, I was born too feeble to contend against the state. Look at what Antigone says. My goodness gracious. I feel like it's possible to admire someone like I admire Antigone, but she is not a likable character to me. None at all. She is so harsh and rough and abrupt with her sister, whereas Ismene is gentle and loving and patient. This is page 4. Antigone says, you will justly incur the dead man's hatred. My gosh, Antigone is promising her sister the hatred of their dead brother. Harsh, very harsh. She's noble, Antigone. She's courageous, but again, to me, she's not very likable. Moving on here, her sister says, Ismene, same page, lover true to your beloved, nonetheless are you. Really, she feels a lot of love, as we see throughout the play, Ismene, for her sister. She's always expressing it and verbalizing it. We don't get the same from Antigone, though. Moving on here. So now the chorus tells us on page 4, basically, what has happened here. The chorus in terms of Polynices and Eteocles. The chorus calls Polynices an evil-spoken zealot. And again, they talk all about how, Eteocles defended the city of Thebes while Polynices invaded and attacked. And so they just joined in a battle and to the death, unfortunately. So this is what the chorus is talking about. The chorus says at the top of page 6, or ever his jaws were filled with blood of us and ours, talking about Polynices. Polynices' jaws, in other words, are filled with Theban blood. So let's talk a little bit about the chorus in this play. The chorus here is far different than that of Medea, which we spoke about. The chorus in the play Medea, they were the women of Corinth. They were highly sympathetic to the protagonist. This is far different now in this play. Here, the chorus, they're men of long-standing prestige. They're the elders of the city. Of course, they're looking out for the city of Thebes. They're very patriotic. They're very different from Antigone in terms of gender, in terms of age, and so forth, and in terms of their interests, of course. So the chorus here, they're full of respect for the state, full of respect for authority, government authority. And so the chorus here, it doesn't have any ties of personal devotion to any one character, like we saw in Euripides' play, to one individual. They're just loyal to the entire community as a whole. They're mature individuals. They're morally responsible citizens of Thebes. So Anyhow, we have on page 7 this image of Bacchus or Dionysus leading his dancing Theban countrymen. All of a sudden, that contrasts with King Creon's entrance and his proclamation. Take a look. This is page 7 at the bottom. This is King Creon now. He's very patriotic here. I feel like in this first speech, we can really admire him. Anybody would admire him. Unfortunately, his actions afterwards don't seem admirable, at least to me. But, you know, I respect your views, whatever they may be. There's a lot of metaphors that Creon uses in terms of the ship. Naval, I suppose, metaphors here. He says, page 7, sirs, for the ship of state, the gods once more, after much rocking on a stormy surge, set her on even keel. And so here in this opening scene, Creon is presented in the eyes of an Athenian audience. They would see him as this patriotic statesman. He's insisting in this long speech on the safety of the state, that overrides everything. That overrides ties of friendship, ties of family. It really makes a lot of sense what he's talking about. And so to me, I feel like this creates a favorable impression of King Creon, his first speech. But of course, that's quickly destroyed by his subsequent words and actions. Page 8, he says, I'll just read a part of it. Him too who sets a friend before his native land, I prize at nothing. Nothing, God who sees all things always witness it. If I perceive where safety should have been, mischief advancing toward my citizens, I will not sit in silence, nor account as friend to me the country's enemy. So, you know, an Athenian audience would agree with Creon here when he says that whoever places a friend above the good of the country is nothing, is worthless. I've thought time and again of what Creon says, and really it does make a lot of sense. You know, one should be patriotic to one's country. That's very important. But I mean, look at how far, unfortunately, he takes it. So anyhow, Creon is now speaking of Polynices as one who came to destroy Thebes, the sanctuaries of its gods. This is the bottom of page 8 to page 9. Creon is full of praise for Eteocles, quote unquote, Eteocles, who in this city's quarrel fought and fell, the foremost of our champions in the fray. They should entomb with the full sanctity of rites that solemnize the downward road of their dead greatest. Polynices, who returning home a banished man, sought to lay waste with fire his household gods, his native country, sought to glut himself with his own kindred's blood or carry them away to slavery. His body shall be left to be devoured by dogs and the fowls of the air. And so now Creon says, but whoever is friendly to this city shall by me, living or dead, be honored equally. That makes a lot of sense here, but however, though, let's see what happens. So as soon as Creon's decree is delivered, a frightened soldier, the sentinel, comes on stage. He's one of the guards who was posted to watch the deceased body of Polynices. And so what does the sentinel report? That during a dust storm where no one could see anything, there was no visibility, somebody gave the body a symbolic burial by scattering dust on it. And so according to Greek belief, this is enough to ensure passage of that deceased man's soul to the lower world. Of course, Creon is enraged. And so page 11 now, bottom of page 11, the senator is suggesting that this might have been the work of the gods. But this idea makes Creon even more angry. Creon is threatening the sentinel and the sentinel's associates with torture and death if they don't find the person, the culprit responsible, who ended up actually removing the body. This is on the bottom of page 8. And so Creon is saying now, to say that the gods might have done this, look at what he says. To say that guardian deities would care for this dead body is intolerable. Could they, by way of supereminent honor, pay to a benefactor, give him burial, who came to fire their land, their pillared fanes or temples? and sacred treasures and set laws at naught? Or do you see gods honoring the bad? So actually, Creon suspects a conspiracy. He immediately suspects so. He thinks that the guard was bribed. He tells the guard that if he doesn't find the culprit, the guard, is going to pay the penalty himself. And Creon thinks, this is the work of conspirators who are grumbling against him in the dark. Again, page 12, quote unquote, murmuring at me, shaking their heads in secret, stiffening uneasy necks against this yoke of mine. They have suborned these sentinels to do it. I know that well. He goes on, the real actor in this funeral, death by itself shall not suffice for you. Before hung up alive, you have revealed the secret of this outrage. Several times, Creon talks about people acting for profit, being bribed. He talks about this at the bottom of page 12. He talks about this on page 13. He tells the sentinel, for money you would sell your soul. He's going to say the same thing to Tiresias, the soothsayer, in a few moments as well. And Creon sees all opposition to his will as a product of bribery, as action for profit. And so he's repeatedly accusing, again, the sentinel here and later Tiresias. Anyhow, moving on. A chorus now for the next few pages is singing all about, human ingenuity and what has made humans masters of the earth and air and nature and so forth. And, there's no obstacle to human development in the future, except that humans can go too far, whether it's as a force for evil or for good. This is the next few pages. And then page 15, the chorus is surprised that anyone should dare to do what Antigone has done here in breaking Creon's decree. This is page 15. Anyhow, the sentinel returns to Creon and brings Antigone. Antigone has been captured. She has been captured when she was found to be replacing the dust that the guards had swept off the body. She was pouring libations on it as well. This is also on page 17. And so she's interrogated, Antigone, now by Creon. She admits that it was her responsibility. She admits that she is defying him. And so she claims that she's supporting higher divine laws that override Creon's decree. And of course, Creon sadly is going to condemn her to death. Again, Antigone, she's devoted to the laws of the gods, not those of mankind. And so she says that in burying her brother, she was obeying the laws of the gods. Let's see here. She says this on page 17. First, Creon says, and you made free to overstep my law. And she responds, because it was not Zeus who ordered it, nor Justice, dweller with the nether gods, gave such a law to men, nor did I deem your ordinance of so much binding force as that a mortal man could overbear, the unchangeable written code of heaven. This is not of today and yesterday, but lives forever, having origin whence no man knows, whose sanctions I were loath in heaven's sight to provoke, fearing the will of any man. I knew that I should die. She's very brave. She knew what the penalty was, what the ramification was, and she went through with this anyway. This is her proud speech about higher laws. And so I feel like, from the beginning to the end of the play, she is devoted to the divine powers of the world below. That's where her parents lie. That's where both her brothers lie. And so, that makes sense, sadly, tragically. She's very stubborn, like her uncle Creon. King Creon is like her father Oedipus was. Creon, in fact, says, page 18, tempers too stubborn are the first to fail. That's a great quote. And he's really threatened by her. He says this several times in the play. He lashes out. Same page, he says, truly, if he or she wields such powers uncensured, she is man, I woman. Creon is also indicting Ismene. Top of page 19, he says, she and the sister, for her equally I charge with compassing this funeral. even though we know Ismene did not aid her sister. So moving on, Antigone says on page 20 in the middle, she says, these rights are due to the underworld. And so when Antigone defies Creon in the name of higher justice, he takes it as a challenge to his manhood. Look at what he says, same page. No woman while I live shall order me. So again, in Greece's male-dominated society, it would have been highly unusual, very strange, for a female to be talking about the correct ethical course to a male, not just to a male, but to the king. Very, very unusual. And so the chorus says here, bottom of page 20, Ismene, weeping drops of sisterly grieving comes, and a cloud overhanging her eyebrows mars her dark flushed cheek and moistens her fair face with pitiful tears. So now Ismene is entering this scene. She tries to associate herself with Antigone's action, but Antigone denies her sister any share in what she sees as her own glory. You know what puts me off about Antigone, especially with regard to her sister? She has a holier than thou attitude. So Ismene says, I think this is very admirable because she knows what the penalty is. She wants to join in with her sister, share that suffering and punishment. That's very noble of Ismene. Page 21, she says, yes, I have done it. If Antigone says so, I join with her to share the blame. What does Antigone say? A friend in words is not a friend for me. Do not claim work you did not touch. I shall suffice to die. I feel like actually, I know that Antigone is a courageous one, but I would argue that Ismene is showing courage and wanting to have joint responsibility, with her sister, wanting to share the punishment with her sister. In fact, I feel like Ismene, she loves her sister so much that she cannot endure life without her, and this is what inspires Ismene with courage. She is acting out of love. I feel like Antigone, her actions, they stem from extreme pride. There's nothing wrong with that, but it just shows how different these sisters are. Ismene says, page 22, how could I live on alone without my sister? What does their uncle, the king, say? Do not say, quote unquote, my sister, for you have sister no more. He's supposed to be their uncle, okay? My gosh. Ismene says, what, will you put to death your own son's bride? And so this is the first time we learn that Antigone is engaged to marry her cousin, Haemon, who is King Creon's son. Look at what Creon says in response to Ismene. Death will prevent that bridal right for me. My goodness gracious. He's taking this too far, way too far. Next, page 23, we have these laments from the chorus. There's choral odes talking about the doomed house of Oedipus. When we had in classroom sessions, in class instruction, I would always cover Oedipus before Antigone. There's not really as much time here with the online format. So the chorus is saying that even though Antigone is a victim of a family curse, the decision to act as she did, that comes from her own free choice, her own responsibility. There's a lot of poignancy also to what they're saying. Moving on now, the next scene is with Creon and his son Haemon. Of course, Haemon is engaged to marry Antigone. Look at what Creon tells his son, page 25. Better to spurn this maiden as a foe. Leave her to wed some bridegroom in the grave. For having caught her in the act, alone of the whole city disobeying me, I will not publicly belie myself, but kill her. For he alone, who is a man of worth in his own household, will appear upright in the state also. My goodness. I see what he's saying here. He's trying to set an example. He's so harsh. He says, obedience is due to the state's officer in small and great, just and unjust commandments. And so he goes on, page 26, Creon, therefore it is, we must assist the cause of order. This forbids concession to a feminine will. Better be outcast if we must of men than have it said a woman worsted us. My gosh, Creon is afraid of independent women. You see this again and again, in his speeches here. Haemon is trying to persuade his father, to change his mind about Antigone's unjust punishment. He tells his father basically that her deed was glorious, and the city's citizens are going to see her deed as being one of glory. The citizens of the city are going to mourn her, and he's going to look Creon like a tyrant if he goes through punishing his niece. Bottom of page 26, he says, mark the words, being your son, to mark the words, the deeds, and the complaints of all. To a private man your frown is dreadful, who has things to say that will offend you. But I can secretly gather this, how the folk mourn this maid, who of all women most unmeriting for noblest acts dies by the worst of deaths, who her own brother battle slain unburied would not allow to perish in the fangs of carrion hounds or any bird of prey. And so the whisper darkling passes round, is she not worthy to be carved in gold? That's what the city citizens are going to think of her. They're going to think of her as heroic, and then they're going to view Creon as a tyrant. So he tells his father, page 27, to not stretch this course too far. Let thy wrath go, be willing to relent, he says. 'Tis good to learn of those who counsel wisely. That's a good quote. He's telling his father. Look at what his father says, page 28. He's basically saying, while he's quarreling with his son Creon, I feel like he's talking more like a tyrant than a democratic statesman. Page 28, he says, Creon, the city to prescribe me my decrees. In other words, the city is the king's. That's the law. Haemon says, a city is no city that is of one man only. Creon says, is not the city held to be his who rules it? And so Creon is accusing his son of, quote unquote, fighting on the woman's side. Haemon tells his father, same page, you desecrate by trampling on heaven's honor. Creon calls his son a, quote unquote, woman's follower. Quote unquote, never shall she live on to marry thee. Creon is insisting that Antigone, his niece, must die. That's a good way to get rid of his future daughter-in-law, isn't it? My goodness gracious. What does Haemon say? Die as she may, she shall not die alone. It's going to be a high tragedy pretty soon. You know, what's interesting here is, as a leader, Creon, the name Creon means ruler in Greek. And so here in this play, as a leader, he's showing a lot of unsteadiness, actually, in the face of opposition. First, he decides that Ismene is just as guilty as Antigone. But then he changes his mind about Ismene. He fluctuates about Antigone's fate several times. The original decree of his was death by stoning, but at one point Creon is going to have her executed publicly in front of his own son, who is her fiancé. My gosh. Finally, what does Creon decide to do? He decides to entomb this poor woman alive, but eventually he revokes this decision. He changes his mind at the last minute. And so I feel like a major theme of this play is the indecisive way in which a politician can deal with a serious crisis. And so there's a timelessness of that theme as well. Moving on. So he calls his son, page 29, thou woman's bondsman. Look at what Queen Creon says. Bring out the wretch, Antigone, that in his sight at once here with her bridegroom by her she may die. And so what does his son say? My face thou shalt never behold again. So sad. So anyhow, moving on here. This is when he decides, page 29, Creon, that he's not going to charge Ismene with any sort of crime. And look at what Creon says. He says that Antigone is to be buried alive in a tomb, quote unquote, in some rock-hewn cave with only food enough provided her for expiation. He says he wants to, quote unquote, escape the guilt of blood. He himself uses the words buried alive in reference to Antigone. That's going to be her final punishment. And so now the chorus are in this moment celebrating the power of love, because love is what caused this present quarrel between kinsmen here. And so they're talking about explaining that love cannot be destroyed despite all the attempts at its destruction. This idealistic, view of the chorus here. So now Antigone, page 30, she's on her way to her imprisonment in the cave. She's leaving the light of the sun. She had hoped to be married to Creon's son. Of course, that all fades, that all disappears. She's appealing now to the chorus, for the chorus to look upon her as she's going to her imprisonment. Quote unquote, page 30. I gaze upon the latest light of day that I shall never see. And so I feel like she wants them to join in her sorrow, the chorus. She's lamenting her premature death. But unfortunately, the chorus, look at what the chorus says. Same page, bottom of page 30. Nay, but with praise and voicings of renown that part is for that prison house of the dead, unsmitten by diseases that consume, by sword unvisited. Anyhow, here the chorus is telling her she's going to get fame, she's going to get renowned for having not died an ordinary death from disease or in battle, because she was still alive when she was sent to her demise. So anyhow, moving on here, my goodness, she's looking for some sympathy here, something from the chorus, but she's not really getting that. This is page 31 now. She likens herself to Niobe. Remember when we discussed the Iliad? This was in book 24 when Achilles was talking with Priam and telling him he has to go on with his life, he has to eat. They cannot condemn themselves to be like Niobe. The mournful parent Niobe. And so now Antigone, she's comparing herself to Niobe because she's dying here basically in a rock. So she's thinking about that sort of monument that Niobe became, monument of sorrow. Let's see here. She's saying, page 31, Antigone, they mock me, gods of Thebes, why scorn you me thus to my face, alive, not death-stricken yet? So she feels like this promise of renown and fame that the chorus talked about, it's really a mockery to her, it's really an insult. She's just looking for sympathy for her dire predicament and acknowledgement that she's done the right thing. Is really what she's looking for. Let's see, what is she's saying here? This is the top of page 32. Listen and see, let none of you forget how sacrificed and for what laws offended, by no tears friended, I to the prisoning mound of a strange grave am journeying underground. Ah, me unhappy, home is none for me, alike in life or death, an exile must I be. So, and so what does the chorus answer? They're saying, they call her, quote unquote, child of daring. And even though she's a victim of a family curse, the decision that she made is her own responsibility. It's her own free will. It's interesting because free choice as depicted by Greek traditions, we see that here. We see that with Oedipus. So even if someone is an instrument of a family curse, as Oedipus was, as other characters in Greek tragedy, that character's personal initiative is highlighted, is emphasized. So again, in this play and in the play Oedipus, so the chorus goes on, my goodness, bottom of page 32, to pay due reverence is a duty to, and power, his power, whose empire is confessed, may no wise be transgressed. So they're saying, the chorus, that she is showing some sort of piety by showing honor to the deceased, but they're also saying that authority cannot be transgressed. Moving on here, so now she's saying, Antigone, top of page 33, she is, quote unquote, friendless. She's unwept, nor any friends lament the death I die, she says. Look at what Creon says on the same page. For us, we will be guiltless of this maiden's blood, but here on earth she shall abide no more. So Creon now is urging his attendants to imprison her in the vault and leave her there. This is Creon's way of avoiding a direct murder with his own hands. He says his hands are clean, but he knows that his niece is going to die in the vault. How can someone be so ruthless and heartless? Isn't there a fine line between patriotism and rational thinking, between patriotism and humanity? Moving on, so she really is looking forward actually to her reunion with her beloved deceased in the dark kingdom of Hades that is ruled by Persephone, who welcomes the spirits there. This is all on page 33 if you get a chance to read what Antigone is saying. On page 34, this is Antigone's last speech, and so this is where she's declaring her love for her dear brother Polynices, and so she's actually ending her speech with a prayer that her persecutor be punished. She says, "Oh, may their punishment be measured by the wrongfulness of mine." She says in the speech, "Am I not come through piety to be held impious?" So just to back up a bit here, what else does she say on page 34 in that speech? She says that, well, let me back up a bit here. I feel like Sophocles took from the history of Herodotus. In the history of Herodotus, there's a story of the Persian king Darius. The Persian king Darius, there was a similar episode where he had a noble who he accused of treason to overthrow him. And so he had this nobleman condemned to prison. And so what happened is the nobleman's wife came and kept crying and crying. And so Darius was so moved, by her constant sorrow and crying. He had someone sent over and said, you can have one person from your husband and his children who are all jailed as well. You can have one of them saved. Who do you want to save from your family who is imprisoned right now for the crime of treason? And the woman said, surprisingly, her brother. So then, word again was sent from King Darius to this woman. Well, why would you choose your brother? Why not your husband who should be dearer to you, your children who should be dearer to you? And her response was interesting. And this is what we have Antigone saying here when she's talking about her love for her brother. The Persian woman had said, that because her parents were both deceased, she could never have another brother again. But quote unquote, God willing, she could have another husband and children should the unfortunate, murder occur of her husband and children who are currently imprisoned. So this is basically what Antigone is saying, top of page 34, that, she could never have another brother, and so it's worthwhile what she's done to show her love for her deceased brother. Moving on, Antigone says, very dramatically, top of page 35, what doom is mine, and at whose hands, and for what cause that I duly perform the dues of piety. She is very pious, and that was one of the qualities I really admire about her. If you look at one of my essay outlines, I wrote that's one reason why she appears to me, at least, to be a sympathetic character. The chorus here is so clueless. They're now singing of the great men and women of the past who have suffered imprisonment. They just don't get it, do they? Well, again, they're just so different from Antigone in so many ways. So now she's sent away. The chorus is thinking of her rocky tomb here. Moving on. Tiresias, he comes into the picture now. This is page 37. Tiresias, the soothsayer, is coming to warn Creon that the gods disapprove of his action. And so even though Tiresias is physically blind, he can see certain truths that sighted people, including Creon, cannot. And again, he figures in Oedipus, Sophocles' Oedipus as well. So on page 38, Tiresias says he's heard, quote unquote, a strange noise of birds screaming with harsh and dissonant impetus. And so each of the birds tore one another with murderous talons. He's talking about the sputtering of the altar flames, the screaming of the birds. These are all signs of displeasure of the gods, of heavenly displeasure. And so Tiresias senses that an unholy crime is about to take place. And so really Tiresias here, he's speaking for the gods and condemning Creon's action. You should get a chance to read on page 38. He calls Creon, quote unquote, obstinate. That's something that Creon shares with his niece, certainly. And so Creon, unfortunately, he can only think in material terms. He says that prophets and soothsayers in the past have tried to sell him short. And so he says to Tiresias, page 39, gather your gains at will. He's talking about Tiresias coming to him, quote unquote, for the sake of gain. And so anyhow, to him, everything is profit oriented, Creon here. Moving on. Again, he says this several times about him acting upon his gain. At least 3 times on page 39, Creon says. Look at what Tiresias says. And, just to back up a bit here. So in Sophocles' play, the gods warn people not to do a certain thing. And if they do it anyway, they themselves have to have the blame. They have to shoulder the blame. And so Sophocles' plays, he made his characters responsible for their own actions, rather than the characters being puppets of the gods. That's certainly not the case in Sophocles' plays. And so after Tiresias scorns Creon's action, Creon's punishment comes right after his rejection of Tiresias' advice. Look at what Tiresias says now on page 40. One from thy own loins in payment, dead, for thou hast made life join hands with death, and sent a living soul unworthily to dwell within a tomb, and keeps a course here from the presence of the powers beneath. That's Polynices. Not for thy rights or any gods above, but lawlessly in their despite usurped, unhallowed, disappointed, uninterred. Wherefore the late avenging punishers, furies, from death and heaven lay wait for thee to take thee in the evil of thine own hands. Women's wails to thine own house shall answer. Oh my goodness gracious. So what does Creon say now? Once he says as Tiresias and he leaves the scene. And so now Creon is very concerned. He doesn't have this arrogant posture anymore, King Creon. He's finally listening to Tiresias's wise advice. He's taking that advice seriously. Creon has become deeply disturbed. He asks the sentinel on page 41, what should I do? Speak, I will hearken. He's asking what to do, whereas he was issuing all these orders and he was calling the shots. So Creon finally accepts the advice of the chorus to free Antigone from her tomb. Let's see here. He says, the senator responds to Creon when Creon asks, what should I do? The senator says, set free the maiden from the vault and build a tomb for that dead outcast for Polynices. Creon says, I quit heart and yield. I cannot fight at odds with destiny. He goes on, page 41, Creon, for it misgives me it is best to keep the old appointed laws all our life long. He really doesn't want to go against his own decree. But he realizes he has to do so. We get a lot of choral odes in the meantime. Page 45 now, the messenger is coming to bring news to Creon's wife Eurydice. Again, remember I mentioned this when we talked about Euripides' Medea, is that the Greek theater, it focused on the spoken word. And so any events and dramatic action that occurred did not take place necessarily in front of an audience, that this action is reported off stage by a character. Usually it's an eyewitness or a messenger. So we certainly saw that, in Medea. We see that in Sophocles' Oedipus as well. And so the messenger is speaking on page 45. Eurydice, of course, is Creon's wife, is Haemon's mother. And so the messenger is recounting the story about, what happened with Polynices, with Antigone. Moving on, we find out on page 46 very tragically that Antigone hanged herself in the tomb, and that's how Haemon had found her. And Haemon was so upset when he got to her too late in the cave. His father was there right when after he encountered Antigone in the vault, Haemon. So he lunged at his father. He lunged at his father with his sword. He missed his father, and then he killed himself through the heart with the sword. Haemon, very, very tragic. And so anyhow, his mother, Eurydice, is just highly alarmed. She's distraught and she leaves the scene. She's going to end up killing herself, Eurydice. So by this one action of Creon's, he is suffering miserably as well. His son kills himself. His wife kills himself. And so he becomes a tragic character. I feel like, of course, not as tragic as Antigone, who lost her life. We find out at the end now, interestingly, look at page 47 at the bottom, that the chorus does not support the mighty Creon, the mighty King Creon. The chorus says that Creon's misfortunes are all caused by his own doings. Quote unquote, lo now, Creon himself draws near us, clasping a record manifest, if we sin not, saying it, of ruin unwrought by the hands of others, but forecaused by his own self-will. Moving on, and so the messenger tells Creon, top of page 49, that his wife is also deceased. She has taken her life. The messenger says on page 50 at the top, not only did Eurydice kill herself, but she died cursing Creon, quote unquote, summoning evil to fall on thee, the child slayer, is what the messenger says. So really, Creon's decree, his condemnation of Antigone was morally wrong. He made a terrible, horrific mistake, but he's also suffering a terrible punishment. In fact, he says, page 51, come, thou most welcome fate, appear. Oh, come, bring my day's final date. Fill up their sum. Come quick, I pray. Let me not look upon another day. He's praying, Creon, for his own death. Finally, at the end, page 52, this was always my quiz question, is how does Sophocles view Antigone and Creon by the end? Who appears to be in the right? We get this from the chorus, actually. Look at what the chorus says, page 52. Wisdom first for a man's well-being maketh of all things. Heaven's insistence, nothing allows of man's irreverence. And great blows, great speeches avenging, dealt on a boaster, teach men wisdom in age at last. So, even though the chorus is silent about Antigone, is not even discussing her or naming her, it's emphatic, I should say, about Creon. And so clearly, I feel like Sophocles viewed Antigone's stand as having a lot more moral force than Creon's. What is the chorus basically saying here? That the quote-unquote great blows of fate at long last teach us wisdom. And that's the wisdom that was gained by Creon, but it was too late for him. The chorus is saying that the boaster, or the one who was very proud, who had great speeches, was punished with quote-unquote great blows, and that's Creon. They're referencing Polynices' burial, and so by doing this, Creon was showing the gods irreverence, and he's paying a terrible price for it. The loss of his wife, the loss of his son, teaches him the quote-unquote wisdom that he had earlier lacked. So anyhow, again, it's interesting to see the inspiration that this brought forth for this great American, Henry David Thoreau, who was greatly influenced by this play. And one has to follow one's conscience when one is in the right and the laws of the state are wrong. So, and actually, he was the one who coined the term civil disobedience, which we use to this day. So anyhow, I can't wait to hear what your thoughts are for the extra credit discussion. And see you next time. See you next time. Take care.